The alien warlord's laughter echoed through the vast hall of the Grand Conqueror's assembly, a deep, guttural sound that sent ripples of unease through the gathered officers. The massive creature, a 7-foot-tall Bracthal adorned in ceremonial battle armor, pointed one of his clawed fingers at the figure standing before him. The room was filled with 100 of the galaxy's deadliest warriors, generals, tacticians, and assassins from a dozen species, all gathered to witness the latest batch of recruits in the Dominion's elite combat program. This is the creature you bring before me? General Kargath sneered, bearing a mouth full of serrated teeth. His 4 crimson eyes glowed with amusement. This frail, pathetic thing? The assembled officers chittered, grumbled, or outright laughed. The figure in question, standing at rigid attention, did not flinch. Captain Threx, a reptilian officer of the Skarn, hissed in confusion. "It's smaller than I expected. Is this truly a warrior of its species?" A commander of the armored Xur, a hulking insectoid race, clicked its mandibles thoughtfully. "Perhaps it is an underdeveloped one. A failed genetic mutation." General Kargath shook his head, still chuckling. "A mistake, more likely. Or a joke. Surely, Captain Verthun, you do not insult us by presenting this as a genuine candidate." The one called Captain Verthun stepped forward, his dark blue carapace gleaming under the chamber's artificial lighting. Unlike the others, he was not laughing. He was not even smiling, not that his mandibles allowed it. "This is no joke," Verthun stated, his voice carrying across the room. "This is a human." The room fell silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a murmur rippled through the gathered warlords. Confusion, curiosity, disbelief. A few chuckled again, uncertain. "A human?" General Kargath scoffed. "Impossible. The humans refuse to fight. They are weaklings, diplomats, traders, technicians. They rely on machines, not strength. They lack warriors." Verthun didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to the human standing at attention. "State your name and rank." The figure stepped forward. It was a male, dressed in a simple combat uniform, unadorned, unarmored. No cybernetic enhancements, no genetic modifications visible to the naked eye. Just flesh and bone. He was smaller than almost every officer in the room, standing at a modest 6 feet, short by galactic military standards. His face was unreadable, expression calm, disciplined. Lieutenant James Carter, United Terran Marine Corps. His voice was steady, firm, devoid of fear. A silence stretched over the whole. Kargath's amusement returned, albeit tempered. "A Marine, you say? From a race that has never engaged in full-scale war in centuries." He turned to Verthun with mocking disbelief. "You expect me to believe that this soft-bodied creature is capable of surviving even a single trial in the Dominion's combat training?" Verthun's mandibles twitched. "I do." Kargath's grin widened. "Then let us see it die." The hall rumbled with approval. James Carter remained motionless. The training ground was brutal, an arena of shifting terrain, filled with deadly drones, environmental hazards, and strategically placed obstacles designed to test the mettle of even the most hardened warriors. Dozens of recruits had already met their demise here. The challenge was simple: survive for 10 minutes against the automated war drones. For a Xur, this was a test of armor and endurance. For a Skarn, a measure of agility and cunning. For a Bracthal, raw brutality. For a human... The warlords watched from a high observation platform as Carter was led into the pit, unarmed. The countdown began. The first drone lunged at him, a towering, quadrupedal construct armed with plasma cannons and monomolecular claws. A standard combatant in any Dominion battlefield. Carter moved. It was instantaneous, his reaction time bordering on the impossible. Instead of retreating or dodging wide like the warlords expected, he moved toward the drone, ducking low under its initial swipe. His hands found the exposed joint of its leg plating. With a swift, brutal motion, he twisted his body, using leverage rather than raw strength, and the drone collapsed onto its side. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The drone recovered fast, but Carter was faster. He didn't waste a second. He climbed onto its back, found a seam in the plating, and drove his fingers into the exposed servos. The machine sparked, shuddered, and went still. He had disabled it in under 5 seconds. Kargatha's grin faltered. The second drone attacked. This one was airborne, a sleek interceptor designed for high-speed engagements. It fired a barrage of plasma bolts, forcing Carter to roll aside. But instead of simply evading, he timed his movement perfectly, letting the bolts strike the ground where he had been standing a mere fraction of a second earlier. A chunk of shrapnel was blown free. He grabbed it mid-motion. The drone circled for another pass. Carter threw. The shard, heated by the plasma's impact, cut through the drone's wing-like stabilizer. It spiraled out of control, crashing into the ground in a fireball of twisted metal. The warlords were silent. The 10-minute countdown continued. More drones emerged. Carter adapted. When faced with a brute-force opponent, he used its momentum against it, forcing it to overextend or fall into environmental hazards. When faced with ranged attackers, he used cover, moved unpredictably, and disrupted targeting systems with whatever debris he could find. When faced with overwhelming numbers, he didn't try to fight head-on, he manipulated the battlefield, turning the machines against each other through strategic positioning and rapid movement. By the time the countdown reached 0, the arena was littered with smoldering wrecks. Carter stood in the center, unscathed. Kargatha's claws dug into the railing. The warlords didn't speak. Verthun, ever composed, turned to the general. Still laughing. Carter's performance sent shock waves through the Dominion's upper ranks. Overnight, whispers of the human anomaly spread through the war academies. He was subjected to further tests, each more grueling, each more impossible than the last. He passed them all. But Kargath refused to acknowledge it. He saw it as a fluke, an anomaly to be corrected. Humans were weak. They had to be. He issued a challenge. A duel. Carter accepted. The terms were simple. No weapons, no enhancements, no armor. Pure hand-to-hand combat. The arena was packed with spectators. Kargath towered over the human, his muscles rippling beneath his crimson war paint. "I will crush you," he snarled. "You are nothing." Carter only smiled. The duel began. Kargath lunged, claws swiping, fangs bared. Carter sidestepped. The strike missed by a hair's breadth. Kargath snarled and came again, faster, stronger. Carter flowed like water, slipping past every attack with impossible precision. Then he struck. A single blow. Not to the body. Not to the head. To the throat. The impact sent Kargath reeling. Silence. The warlord fell to his knees, gasping. Carter stood over him. Unbroken. Still human. Still victorious. The silence in the arena stretched, thick with disbelief. The once roaring crowd of Dominion officers and warlords stood frozen, their eyes locked onto the scene before them. General Kargath, the undefeated Brakthal warlord, was on his knees, clutching his throat. His 4 crimson eyes were wide with shock, his mandibles twitching involuntarily as he gasped for air. And standing over him, completely unscathed, was the human. Lieutenant James Carter. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire Dominion High Command had forgotten how to breathe. Then, the silence shattered. "He cheated!" The cry came from somewhere in the audience, followed by murmurs and growls of agreement. Kargatha's subordinates stepped forward, bristling with rage, their claws flexing, their weapons humming to life. "Humans do not possess such power," a Xur officer snarled, his iridescent exoskeleton flaring with agitation. "This is trickery." "A fluke," another warlord spat. "A meaningless accident. There is no way a human." Verthun raised a hand, silencing the commotion. "No weapons were used. No enhancements. No armor," the Skarn captain stated calmly. The duel was observed by every officer in this hall. The terms were clear. His dark blue carapace gleamed under the artificial light as he turned toward the struggling Kargath. And yet, the human stands. The general does not. Kargath's 4 eyes burned with fury. He clenched his fists, his massive form trembling with rage, but he could not deny what had just happened. The human had beaten him. With a single strike. Carter didn't say a word. He merely turned and walked away, leaving the stunned warlords in his wake. But as he reached the exit, Kargath's voice, hoarse, but seething, cut through the air. "This isn't over." Carter stopped but didn't look back. "I don't need it to be." Then he was gone. The news of Kargath's defeat spread like wildfire. Within hours, Dominion warlords across the known galaxy had heard the tale. The invincible Brakthal general, humbled by a lone human in unarmed combat. But Kargath was not a creature known for patience. Within days, he had orchestrated his revenge. Carter was summoned to a Dominion War Council, a rare event, considering that humans had never been offered a seat at such a gathering before. He arrived in a towering war chamber aboard the Dominion flagship Vargotha, surrounded by some of the most powerful military minds in the galaxy. At the head of the council stood Kargath, his massive frame looming over the others. His wounds had healed, but his pride had not. His crimson eyes burned with barely contained fury. "The Dominion High Command has convened," Kargath announced, his voice cold and controlled, "to address a pressing issue, one that threatens the very integrity of our great empire." Carter leaned against the wall, arms crossed, unimpressed. He already knew where this was going. "The human," Kargath continued, his gaze locking onto Carter, "has disrupted our military hierarchy. His unorthodox combat methods have cast doubt upon our traditions. This anomaly must be tested further." A murmur rippled through the gathered officers. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uneasy. Verthun, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "The human has already proven his abilities," the Skarn captain said, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Is this truly a necessary course of action, or simply an attempt at revenge?" Kargath's eyes narrowed. "You dare question my judgment, Verthun?" "I question unnecessary bloodshed," Verthun replied smoothly. Kargath bared his teeth. "Then let us make it necessary." He turned back to Carter. A true test of his abilities. A battlefield challenge. The council murmured again, this time with interest. Carter sighed. "All right, I'll bite. What's the challenge?" Kargath grinned. "A full-scale war simulation. 100 of our finest Dominion warriors against one." The room stiffened. Even Verthun's normally composed expression faltered. "That is not a test. That is an execution." Carter smirked. 100? Only. Kargath's grin wavered for just a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered. "You will be placed in a combat arena. No reinforcements. No weapons beyond what you can scavenge. If you can survive for 1 hour, you win." The officers whispered among themselves. Even among the Dominion's most elite soldiers, such a test was absurd. No single warrior could survive against 100 trained killers. Carter cracked his neck and gave Kargath an amused look. "Deal." The combat arena was unlike anything Carter had seen before. A vast, artificial war zone, a shifting battlefield with unpredictable terrain, simulated artillery strikes, and strategically placed obstacles. The 100 warriors assembled against him were no ordinary soldiers. They were Dominion elites, hand-picked by Kargath himself. Brakthal berserkers. Xur assassins. Skarn shock troops. All trained for war. All waiting to kill him. The countdown began. Carter exhaled. Then the fight started. They came at him fast, blades flashing, plasma rifles humming. The first attacker, a Brakthal nearly twice his size, swung a massive warhammer at his skull. Carter ducked. The hammer slammed into the ground, cracking the stone beneath it. Before the Brakthal could recover, Carter surged forward, striking with surgical precision. A knee to the ribs. A palm strike to the throat. A final twist of the arm. The Brakthal collapsed. But the others didn't hesitate. Carter kept moving. A Xur assassin lunged at him from behind, twin daggers gleaming. Carter spun, deflecting the first strike with his forearm. The second blade barely missed his ribs. He grabbed the assassin's wrist, twisted. Crack. One down. Another warrior charged, a Skarn shock trooper, built like a tank, wielding a heavy plasma rifle. Carter rolled, closing the distance before the alien could fire. He grabbed the rifle, wrenched it upward. The shot went wild, striking another warrior in the chest. Carter used the distraction to sweep the Skarn's legs, driving an elbow into his skull as he fell. More came. More fell. The battle became a blur of movement, strategy, and raw instinct. Carter didn't fight with brute strength. He fought with precision. He used the terrain, the enemy's own weapons, their own momentum against them. Minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. The remaining warriors hesitated. Some of them looked at each other, uncertain. This was supposed to be a slaughter. But it wasn't Carter who was bleeding. It was them. Then the final countdown began. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Kargath watched from the viewing platform, his claws gripping the railing so tightly they cracked the metal. 3. 2. 1. The alarm sounded. Carter stood alone. 100 warriors lay defeated around him. Breathing hard, covered in bruises but still standing, he turned his gaze up to Kargath. The general stared down at him, his expression unreadable. Carter smirked. Still laughing. The War Council chamber aboard the Vargotha was dead silent. The Dominion officers, generals, and warlords who had gathered to witness Carter's demise now stood in a stunned, frozen hush. 100 of their finest warriors had entered the arena. Only one man remained standing. And he was human. James Carter exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as he took in the sight of the battlefield. The bodies of his opponents, bruised, broken, and battered, littered the ground around him. Some groaned, struggling to rise, but most were unconscious or completely incapacitated. He wasn't unscathed himself. His uniform was torn, his knuckles bloodied, and bruises blossomed across his arms and ribs, but compared to the carnage he had just survived, he looked as if he had gone for a morning jog. Above the arena, General Kargath's claws flexed against the railing of the observation deck. His 4 crimson eyes locked onto Carter with a mixture of rage and disbelief. This, Kargath's voice was barely above a growl. This is impossible. Verthun, standing beside him, let out a low chitter. And yet, it happened. The murmurs among the Dominion High Command intensified. Words like improbable, unthinkable, and unnatural rippled through the crowd. Carter had not merely won. He had shattered everything they thought they knew about human combat capabilities. Kargath's mandibles clenched. He could feel it slipping, his authority, his dominance, his iron grip over the Dominion's military doctrine. The image of Dominion superiority had just been dealt a fatal blow, and it had come from a species the galaxy had long dismissed as irrelevant. But he wasn't done yet. His fury turned cold, calculated. Slowly he straightened, and his voice rang out, booming over the assembled officers. This was merely a test of survival, Kargath declared, regaining his composure. An endurance trial. His gaze sharpened as he looked down at Carter. But war is not merely about survival. It is about victory. Carter raised an eyebrow, wiping a streak of blood from his temple. You got another game for me, big guy? Kargath's lips curled into something resembling a grin, though there was no amusement in it. Only malice. Yes, he said, his voice like grinding stone. A real battlefield. The murmurs in the council chamber quieted. Even Verthun's antennae twitched with apprehension. Kargath continued. We will send this human into a war zone. A real Dominion battlefield, against a real enemy force. His eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. Alone. Verthun clicked his mandibles. This is unnecessary. This is war, Kargath countered. And if the human truly believes he is as capable as he claims, let him prove it where it matters. Carter smirked, stretching his arms behind his head. You're really desperate to see me die, huh? Kargath didn't react. The challenge is set. Do you accept? Carter exhaled through his nose, rolling his neck. He could feel the eyes of every warlord, every officer, every soldier in the room watching him. He met Kargath's gaze. Yeah, he said. Why not? The battlefield was a hellscape. It was a barren moon, its surface scarred by centuries of warfare. The sky was an eerie, swirling red, choked with ash and smoke from the burning wreckage of Dominion and enemy war machines alike. The ground was cratered and unstable, littered with the remains of fallen soldiers and shattered equipment. And across the horizon, advancing toward him in massive, disciplined formations, was an army. Carter crouched behind the wreckage of a downed Dominion gunship, studying the enemy force through the smoke. Thousands of them. A mechanized infantry division belonging to the Zrath Dominion, a splinter faction that had rebelled against Kargath's rule years ago. They were heavily armed, clad in advanced combat exoskeletons, their ranks bolstered by towering war mechs. And Carter? He had exactly nothing. No weapons. No reinforcements. No backup. Just his brain. He exhaled, cracking his knuckles. All right, he muttered to himself. Let's see how dumb these guys are. The Zrath infantry advanced, their massive war machines stomping across the battlefield, their aerial drones sweeping ahead in tight formations. Carter grinned. He waited. Then he moved. The first explosion sent shock waves through the battlefield. A Zrath war mech, towering at 20 feet, had stepped on a buried cluster of unstable plasma cores that Carter had hastily rigged into a makeshift mine. The resulting blast tore through its leg servos, sending it crashing into the advancing infantry, crushing dozens beneath its weight. The enemy forces hesitated for only a moment. Then the second explosion ripped through the battlefield. And the third. And the fourth. In less than 2 minutes, Carter had turned their own battlefield into a death trap. From the Dominion warship above, the High Command watched the battle unfold. "This is impossible," one officer muttered, watching the display screens. "He has no weapons. No supplies. He should be dead already." Verthun observed in silence, his antennae twitching in deep thought. Kargath, meanwhile, was gripping the railing so tightly his claws had begun to crack the metal. His eyes burned as he watched the human move across the battlefield, darting through the wreckage like a phantom, setting traps, using fallen enemy weapons against their own troops, luring war mechs into ambushes, hacking into abandoned Dominion tech to disrupt enemy communications. One man. One unarmed man. And the Zrath forces were losing. Kargath's breathing was heavy. His mind reeled. This wasn't possible. This wasn't how war worked. And yet, it was happening right in front of him. On the battlefield, Carter sprinted through the ruins, his mind working a mile a minute. His movements weren't random. Every step was calculated. Every action was deliberate. He knew how these soldiers thought. They were trained for traditional warfare, coordinated assaults, overwhelming firepower, predictable patterns. But Carter didn't fight fair. Within an hour, the Zrath forces were in chaos. Their formations were broken. Their war mechs were either destroyed or crippled. Their remaining infantry was scattered, leaderless, terrified. Carter stood atop the wreckage of a downed Zrath command ship, looking over the battlefield he had just single-handedly dismantled. He exhaled. Easiest day of my life. A hush fell over what remained of the Zrath troops. Those still standing didn't attempt to fight. They didn't even raise their weapons. They surrendered. To one man. Back aboard the Vargotha, the silence in the war chamber was deafening. Kargath could feel the weight of 100 eyes on him. Eyes filled not with amusement, but with something else. Something he had never seen before. Fear. And standing at the center of it all, smirking up at him through the warship's viewing screen, was Carter. Kargath's hands trembled. "This," he whispered. "This cannot be." Carter's voice crackled over the comms. "Still laughing." The silence aboard the Vargotha was suffocating. Every officer, every warlord, every high-ranking Dominion strategist stood motionless, their gazes locked onto the war screens that displayed the battlefield below. What had once been a war zone teeming with thousands of Zrath soldiers had been reduced to a wasteland of shattered war mechs, disabled vehicles, and scattered, terrified survivors. And standing alone, atop the ruins of a destroyed command crawler, was a human. James Carter wiped a streak of blood from his cheek and smirked at the fleet of Dominion warships looming in the sky above him. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the comms crackled to life. "This..." Kargatha's voice came through, low, hoarse, and barely restrained. "This cannot be real." Carter chuckled. "Oh, it's real, all right." He wiped the dirt from his hands and let his gaze sweep over the broken battlefield. "So, what now, General? Still think I'm a joke?" A hush fell over the Dominion war chamber. Warlords who had once scoffed at humanity now stood stiff, uncertain, exchanging uneasy glances. Verthun's mandibles twitched in quiet amusement. He studied Kargath carefully, noting the way his claws flexed against the railing, the barely contained fury simmering beneath his shell. The Brakthal general was unraveling. His entire worldview, one built upon an iron belief in Dominion supremacy, in his own personal dominance, was crumbling before his eyes. And Carter was enjoying every second of it. Kargatha's breathing was ragged. He stared at the screen as if willing it to change, as if hoping that, through some trick of fate, reality would rewrite itself. But no matter how hard he wished, the truth remained. One human had annihilated an entire war division. Alone. A sharp chime rang through the command deck. One of the calm officers hesitated, then turned toward Kargath. "Sir." The officer's voice was barely above a whisper. "The remaining Zrath forces are transmitting a full surrender." Kargath flinched as if struck. "They, what?" "They are requesting terms of surrender. They claim they no longer wish to fight." The officer swallowed hard. They believe fighting against this human is pointless." A murmur rippled through the war chamber. "They think it's pointless," Verthun mused, tapping his claws together. "Interesting." Kargatha's mandibles snapped shut. His entire body trembled with rage. This was more than humiliation. This was destruction. His authority, his reputation, his fear factor, all of it was being stripped away. By a human. He couldn't allow this. He wouldn't. Kargatha's fist slammed into the control panel, shattering the reinforced console beneath his claws. The room flinched at the sudden burst of fury. "Prepare the fleet," he snarled. "We will bombard that battlefield until nothing remains." Gasps rippled through the command deck. Even the most hardened Dominion officers looked uneasy. "Sir," one of Kargatha's subordinates began hesitantly, "the Zrath forces have surrendered. Attacking now would violate the Dominion's war accords." Kargath whipped around, his 4 crimson eyes burning with unrestrained fury. "I will not allow this mockery to stand." The officer swallowed, stepping back. But before Kargath could issue the order, Verthun spoke. "No." Kargath froze. Slowly, he turned his gaze to the Skarn captain, his claws tightening. "What did you say?" Verthun met his glare without fear. "I said no," he repeated, clicking his mandibles. "You would launch an orbital strike on an unarmed battlefield? On surrendered enemies? On a human who has already proven his superiority over our finest warriors?" Kargath took a step forward, his massive frame towering over the Skarn. "You dare challenge me?" Verthun's mandibles twitched into something akin to a smirk. "No." "He does." He tilted his head toward the war screen. Kargath turned back, and his blood ran cold. Carter was no longer standing still. He was walking. No, not walking. Marching. Toward the camera drone that hovered over the battlefield, the very one transmitting to the Vargotha and the entire Dominion War Council. And as he marched, his eyes locked directly onto Kargatha's through the screen. Not with amusement. Not with arrogance. But with a simple, undeniable truth. "I have already won." Carter stopped directly in front of the drone, his face filling the display. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying Kargatha's reaction. Then, In the same casual, infuriating tone he had used before, he spoke. "Hey, General," Carter said, his smirk widening. "You gonna be the sore loser type, or you gonna let this one go?" The chamber was silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Kargatha's claws flexed. His mind screamed at him to retaliate, to crush this insolent human, to erase this insult from history. But he couldn't. Not with the entire Dominion High Command watching. Not with the surrender already acknowledged. Not with the warlords beginning to shift away from him. He had already lost. Slowly, his claws unclenched. His breathing slowed. His mandibles twitched. He took a step back. Then another. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the war chamber. The officers parted to let him through, their expressions unreadable. As the doors slammed shut behind him, the silence remained. Until Verthun finally broke it. "Well," the Skarn captain mused, glancing at the war screen, "it would seem humanity has taught us all a valuable lesson today." Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah. And what's that?" Verthun's mandibles twitched. "Never underestimate a human." The war chamber burst into murmurs, some warlords exchanging cautious glances, others nodding in silent agreement. But Carter, he just smiled, because he already knew that.